Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Jeff Woodgrid, and welcome to the Zoom OSC Test Kitchen. We gather here every Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock Eastern to dig into the features that are released, get introduced to features that are being released or developed. And today's one of those big days where we get to see some new stuff from Andy from Liminal Technologies, who's going to share with us, maybe I'll call it phase one of embedded audio for Zoom ISO. And I'll let Andy further explain what that means and represents, as well as, oh, what was the other? Andy, there's another release coming. Golly, I typed about it. Now I'm tongue-tied. But there's a couple of things coming. So anyways, I'm excited to be here. Glad we've got several of you here as well. David, do you mind if I make you a co-host and let you just kind of manage the waiting room for me so I don't keep people waiting too long? I appreciate that. Welcome to Kuhn, Robert, George Kennedy, Rohit. Who else is here? Leland. Andy, of course, he's not on camera quite yet, but Jeremy is connecting to audio. So I think the group will continue to grow as it normally does as time ticks on here, but certainly glad to be here today. It's hot in the Midwest. I'm in the Kansas City area, and it is daggone hot. I think the heat index is almost 110 today. And but that speaks for the humidity a lot because it's like 95 on the thermometer, but almost 110 on the index, which means it's super humid. So kind of miserable. Good to be inside, that's for sure. So anyways, Andy, talk to me. I haven't heard anybody's voice in my ear yet. I'm hoping the audio is good.
Yeah,
Your
absolutely.
audio is good.
You sound good. We hear you. You're coming through loud and clear.
Good.
It's not quite as hot over here on the East Coast in the DC area, but it is 95 degrees on the thermometer, and DC is a swamp. Much as I love it, George, it is a swamp. Can't deny it. So it's a sweltering day.
Yeah, no question. It's
I'm
it's
gonna come back and
summertime.
I'm gonna come back on camera in a second. I'm having some lunch. Andy, it is hot, dude. I don't know what you're talking about. It is miserably hot down here. How's my audio, guys? That way I don't know how to blow you out.
Yeah,
Good?
Yeah,
sounds
coming
good,
through.
George.
Yep.
All right. I'll come back on in a second.
All right.
You bet. So Andy, I'm not gonna. I already stole a little bit of your thunder, but I'll let you do the rest on what you're here to share with everybody today. And I actually didn't tune in to our favorite morning show, Office Hours, so I'm not sure if you announced anything there or not, but maybe it's not quite as new news to everybody as it was to me when you typed it to me a little while ago. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's
Haven't actually. This is
awesome.
the first chance to look at it. The question that they asked on the show today was about some display link adapters that I'm going to be talking about soon. I'm going to get my hands on them in a couple hours. And what's cool about those is that they allow you to have a they're really special in the sense that they're a display link adapter with a USB Type C end on it. You put it in the back of an M1 and use the display link driver, and you get served up two HDMI outputs, and that's all that it does on the back. So it seems pretty simple all of a sudden. Like, hey, wait, I can buy one of those for $35, right? I just go grab, USB-C on one end, two HDMIs on the other. The trick of it is this uses the display link driver versus the display port driver. And on M1, as you may or may not have experienced before, if you're on a Mac Mini, you get two outputs from DisplayPort, and if you're on a MacBook or any other form factor, you get one. So one external display so one of those two ports won't work if you use like the $35 HDMI adapter. But with these ones, because they have a special driver and it goes back through the CPU to get out, should be able to get they're 120 bucks a pop. But when you compare that to the cost of getting an external Thunderbolt enclosure with a card to put in it, it's a fraction of the price to get out into an HDMI ecosystem. So I ordered a couple of them, and I'm going to be testing all these different display link adapters and coming up with some recommendations. because for an A10 mini workflow, this might be a 699 M1 Mac Mini, two of these outputs, and an A10 mini, which I saw the other day for like under $200 on sale.
Wow.
It's like, to get started. I mean, that's an incredible amount of hardware for what you're paying. So it's something I want to test for sure before I go out and say, hey, go buy this. But for a lot of folks, I think it'll be a good way to get started in the HDMI ecosystem.
Very cool. Yeah, I take not the exact same topic, but similar as far as a dongle goes, or a dummy head. I plugged in that dummy HDMI head to my Mac, and I'm still connected to it, actually. The external monitor, it's a 27-inch LG, cheapy LG monitor. I just use it for for monitors if I do something on site for somebody, so they can have a simple confidence monitor. But it wasn't super friendly to me for Zoom ISO, and you did in fact have me change some scaling on it, which did help it for sure. But the dummy head was instantaneous. I've done nothing to it except plug it in, assign Zoom ISO to it, and it was a perfect solution. You have to get NDI on so you can see what's on that invisible monitor. But in fact that's really momentary. I just kind of want to see that what's there and so forth. Don't really have to actively manage it. It's just kind of a hiding place for your outputs of Zoom ISO, and so it's worked really, really good.
Good.
So
well, that worked out.
Yeah, and I still have the other external monitor as well. So one of them, yeah, the external monitor is going through. Oh, that's what fixed it ultimately as well, as I went through my goodness sake, to the Elgato Thunderbolt 2 dock, and that gave me the speed for the network, but it also improved the external monitor situation, the visible one, and then the dummy head is using the built-in port. So it just kind of making things work, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't afford to go out and buy a brand new Mac, so this one's a 2015, and it's been chugging right along. Zumo, it's my Zoom OSC machine, it's my Zoom ISO machine. 4 outputs has never been a challenge for it. Even when I had, I don't know, there's some new faces here for sure. Even before I connected through the Elgato dock, that built-in network port was 100 meg, and I was sending out 4 NDI outputs from Zoom ISO, and I think it was Benjamin who replied and said that you consume about 50 meg per.
Yep. So at 1080, it
output.
should be 50 a piece. So I'm surprised that you had a good experience on the 100
Yeah,
megabit. But
yeah, interesting.
I wonder if there's something that, because it uses the same sort of technology as like Scan Converter does. So it's not like a camera encoder, right? It's more to do with like the display APIs and stuff like that. So there might be something in there that looks to see if it's constrained and swaps it into a lower bandwidth mode. But
is it? Are you? The conversation is it full NDI or is it NDI HX? I mean, what kind of? It seems super efficient to be 50 meg for a 1080 output.
Mm-hmm. So it's full NDI. So it's the total protocol, which used to be TCP and now is RUDP and NDI5. So it's the full NDI implementation. So it's not HX. It's not using an RTSP stream, which I think NDI HX is based off of. So it's not that, but it's full NDI. But again, it runs at the scan converter specification, which is, so NDI typically, right, if you're coming off of a camera, you're going to be 1 to 200 megabit depending on what encoder preferences you have and resolution you're pushing. But for 1080, you're going to usually land between 100 and 200. High-end cameras, the UA150s and stuff, if they're running in 1080 mode, will be 180. P200 running at sort of base spec, maybe 130 per. Now that has to do, I think the reason that Scan Converter is built the way it is because there's a lot less visual complexity. Even in a fairly complex image, there's a lot less like bit depth and all of that that's coming out rendering to a display versus when you do the reverse and you're capturing it in. So they're able, I think, to get away with a lower bit rate when they do something like that. But any app that, I mean, Isadora is going to be the same way. QLab, all the apps that aren't actual camera encoders,
Recording
they
in
should be around the
progress.
50 megabit button.
I just hit record, as everybody just heard.
Yeah.
I don't usually actually end up using the Zoom recordings, but it's like, the day I forget to hit record will be the day I need it. But
Mhm.
but we are just for some folks who haven't been here before. We've streamed for quite a while to our Facebook group page and group, and also we now stream to the Zoom Test Kitchen YouTube channel as well. So we're out there right now, and so if you get out and about and can't join us, at least watch and listen sometime. Some really good content. So the second item that you're going to talk about today is support for NDI5
That's
as
right.
well, right?
Yeah. So we have a build that I'm going to show you today that when it all works, you actually don't really realize that there's anything different, but it is using NDI5. And so what's cool about NDI5, in addition to all the things that are updated in the protocol, is that it does have native Apple Silicon support. So for those of you who have been kind of holding out on like, oh, should I use an M1 Mac Mini for production workflows? This solves the last sort of asterisk that we had on recommending that $699 M1 Mac Mini, which was that NDI4 was a mixed bag at best, and at worst there was micro stuttering and other issues in the NDI feeds, and they didn't scale super well. So that's where things sort of changed for us in that the native Apple Silicon encoding allowed us to like basically just eliminate in one fell swoop any issue that we were experiencing on M1 architecture. So that was huge for us. So that'll be, I'll show you that today, but it scales super well. The M1 doesn't break a sweat working on these NDI feeds, and they're pretty reliable. So now that being said, there is a larger discussion in our industry right now about NDI4 versus NDI5. And some people will come out and say, oh, it's NDI5 is super unstable. Other people will say, no, it's perfectly fine, but it's the third parties that haven't done their part. Basically, you can boil it down to a mixed NDI4 and NDI5 experience is usually a bad story. So if your apps aren't updated to NDI5, that's not so great. If you're encoding NDI5 but receiving NDI4, that's where you start to run into trouble. And that's going to be like if you have vMix and you didn't update vMix to NDI5, but you've got NDI5 encoders out there, or you're using Zoom ISO with NDI5, then you might start to see some trouble. But if you're in a totally NDI5 ecosystem, it's actually seems to be pretty good. So, but regardless of all of that, even the experience of having an NDI4 receiver with an NDI5 encoder on Apple Silicon is still a better experience in our testing than NDI4 on both ends with Apple Silicon. So to that effect, because we don't want to presume that everybody has everything that they need to work in an NDI5 ecosystem, the next release of Zoom ISO is going to be distributed in 2 binaries. You'll be able to come and download the NDI4 version, or you can download the NDI5 version. So you can decide. We won't decide for you. They'll both be supported. They'll have all the same features. The only difference will be which NDI version is built into the app. I looked into it to try to see if we can distribute one version of the app with like a tick box for which version you want, but it's not really something that you can do inside of their SDK. It doesn't let you leverage all those at once. So they have conflicts. So there'll be 2 binaries you can download, and we won't. You get to decide. My recommendation is going to be, if you're on Apple Silicon, use the NDI5 version. If you're not, maybe stick around with the NDI4 version for now. But we'll let you decide that after you test them, because you can download them for free and try encoding them and see what the experience is. Yeah, George?
So Andy, if you said use the NDI5 version, would you recommend updating your local network also with NDI5?
I think it depends on your workflow. I think, there are some things that might be out of your control. Like, is there an app in the chain that's an NDI4 receiver that doesn't have NDI5 support and doesn't have the ability for you to upgrade it? Because like vMix is an exception, right? vMix is really easy to go in and pull out the DLLs and put in the new DLLs, and then you NDI5 and vMix. There you go. It's unsupported, but it would work. Mimo Live probably not going to work, right? That's one binary package. You just download, deploy it, and go. So it's hard to say for sure, George, but I think over the next couple of months, working out that transition for sure as all of your apps start to move that way, I think would make sense. I have a studio in DC that we do a lot of work with that we just deployed all this NDI4 infrastructure, but we want to move them to 5 as fast as possible because of benefits like being able to determine which parts of their network the NDI feeds are traversing and all of that. Like we've seen some weird stuff there. So because it's a huge network, it's an academic institution, so they've got all sorts of VLANs going on, and we don't want things taking weird routes to get to us and adding latency and drop frames. And when you get it working, but it involves like every time you boot it up, you have to like unplug the soundboard, otherwise it'll loop through the soundboard again there. So you kind of have to do this kind of song and dance to get your system set up. And with NDI5, it'll just be a lot easier to do all of that. So I'd say it depends, honestly. There's not going to be a fell swoop. I think in the future, it'll be easier to recommend once all the decoders are there. But fact of the matter is that they're not. So we're trying to do our part, get our app updated. The rest of the industry will have to do similarly, and then it will be a sort of a slam dunk. Because I do believe in the architectural changes. I think that RUDP is a good choice for something like NDI. So I'm glad that they're making the move. It's just we're in a transition period, and it's kind of weird. So proceed with caution. Yeah.
I wish there was a way you could actually test it. Like I was telling you on Discord, I'm having that issue with NDI4. I mean, I'm sure it's a network issue, and I'm having someone gonna remote in and get that VLAN sorted out. But definitely there is some lag, not with your app, but just NDI in general, pushing from vMix across the network. Everything works fine on the local machines, but as soon as I start trying to pull sources from a different machine, it's hiccups. And even if I try to launch monitors from 2 different machines, as soon as I open up that same source on a different machine, the one on machine 1 will just freeze. So I don't know what's going on there.
You have multicasting configured there, George? Do you know, on that network?
It's a Ubiquity network, so they're lacking in something. So I'm not sure. Yeah. I have to get someone to remote in.
Yeah, let us know. Share what you find and how you get it fixed. It'd be great. There's one message in the chat. If you've seen that, Andy, have you tested USB-C to display port to a triple head?
Yeah. So the Matrox triple head to go. So those have been the sort of the go-tos for projection designers for a long time, because they're really easy. Just hook it up, and now suddenly you've got a whole bunch of ports available there. I did look into that. The triple head itself apparently has some struggles on M1, triple head or quad head to go. I mean, these Matrox products that go out there. And what I saw was just some reports and some clarifications on their ecosystem that there were issues with doing what I was trying to do, which was to get those I wanted 4 HDMI outputs at the end of the day for as little as possible. And it might work, but a quad head to go, last time I tried to buy one, was over $1,000. And so I think it'll be, if we can do this with 2 $130 adapters, I'd be pretty happy. But yeah, there's nothing against the quad head to go or the triple head to go. They're both really cool.
Yeah, there's just a big price jump between the triple and the quad for sure. I was just looking the other day, but yeah, cool tech for sure.
Yeah, and it's just like, for me, like I wouldn't want to start mixing and matching. I wouldn't want to have like the 3 from the triple and the 1 from the back of the M1, because then what would I do with my operator monitor? Would that be another, like, could I do that second display port stream with the other USB-C port? I'm not really sure, but I can almost guarantee that the latencies are going to be different between the different connections. So using identical hardware to get those outputs would seem preferable to me. And that's part of the thing that's cool about DisplayLink, is how it locks up the outputs and syncs them up on the way out. So I feel like there's I'm optimistic about the DisplayLink protocol. I think the only thing that concerns me about that strategy is that it was really hard to find an adapter that met all the criteria that I had. Like, I could literally only find one. I could only find one adapter that was USB-C terminating, DisplayLink certified, and had HDMI ports in the back. That was my criteria. I didn't want to have to be converting DisplayPort to HDMI and all that, and I could only find one that did it. So I ordered a bunch of them, and I'll be testing them, and I'll let you know.
Can you share the one that you found?
Let me go.
With us?
Just give me a quick second. I'll pull it up, and then I can show you. Yeah, George.
So I guess you'll be. I guess I could test. Once I see your results, I'll probably grab one and test it also, or two. I would love to see if they go to a hub, because obviously the Mini only has two outs, and right now I'm using OWC hub to get a few more outputs on the Thunderbolt. So it'd be nice to see if it goes to a hub, because once you're using two, kind of we talked about it, you could only get two outs. It's only got two outs, so you're gonna have to sacrifice both ports or get a hub. So eventually it'd be nice to see if it goes to a hub or not.
There's a question in the chat as well about Zoom ISO's participant list in webinar. See, I haven't seen it, but the comment from Rohit is that it is not filtered to panelists only, and so the list becomes pretty unwieldy at that. So just wondering if there's a way to filter that down or exclude the attendees versus the panelists.
So I can answer that, but let me do this first. So I'll show you the product here. So this is what I bought. So it's a, it's a little bit of a beefy box, but let me go over to Amazon. You can see it there. So this is the device. It's got your two, as you have the option of using DisplayPort or HDMI. You can't do them both simultaneously, but in my case, I'll just take the HDMIs out. It terminates in USB-C. It does have the USB-A adapter. It is DisplayLink, and it's from this company called Pluggable, and it's $120. So I felt that was going to be an interesting choice. But I couldn't find anything else that met these. You can find. I mean, if you Google USB-C to dual HDMI, you can find things that look like this for $30, but they're not using the DisplayLink driver. They're using DisplayPort along the Thunderbolt line to do it, and then they're just terminating it in the HDMI connection. So that's the story on that. I'll have more information about that later today, hopefully, or tomorrow, and I'll let you guys know what I find. But to the question in the chat, there is a filter, and it's the subscription level. So let me switch my camera over to the user interface of the app. And let me switch my vMix here. Okay. And so this is the user interface of Zoom ISO. If you go down to the participants list and you go to subscribe mode, there's an option here for panelists. And when you set that to panelists, what should happen is the group of people on this list should be reduced so that it's only the people who are in the panel. The other options here would be people who have target IDs, people who are video on or in the gallery, basically, is another way to think of that, and all or none. So this right now is tied to the OSC subscribe mode, and that's sort of doubling as a filter right now. You can see everybody in your subscription level in this list and interact with them here. Now, that being said, the truth of it is that if you're trying to do anything other than really basic shows with basic UI interactions, what we want you to do is use OSC to control this, because the entire architecture of this program is that it ties into production hardware and software to be remote controlled. And that's what makes it different from every other offering that we have or that there is on the market, really. So if you take a Stream Deck, for example, and you set your subscribe mode to panelists, you could have the names of everybody appear on the buttons on your Stream Deck, and I show you this in a YouTube video how to set this up. And then you can press the name and assign them to an output. And that, to me, is 15 million times more important than being able to do this through a UI interaction. And you don't even need to have the Zoom OSC license for this. It's all contained within the Zoom ISO license. So you put the Zoom ISO license in there, it turns on the list output, and then you're good to go with Companion. So all you need, I just saw your message there. So all you need is the Zoom ISO license to do this. You don't need to pay for Zoom OSC to do this. There's all sorts of other things that you could do with Zoom OSC if you want, but for what I'm talking about, just having a Zoom ISO license will do the trick, because it turns on the list output, which allows it to connect to Companion. And then once Companion and it are linked up, you can tap on names and assign them to outputs and use all the filtration, all the rules, and all the highlighting about who has video on and who has active speaker and all of that, all those wonderful things that Companion can do in that workflow. That is where we want you to spend your time using the app. The app has a user interface, and it has a couple of basically their ideas about how you could set this up. But one of the things that we're going to show you in the next Zoom ISO update is that every single user interface setting has an OSC command to control it now, the next version. That's everything from setting your resolutions to output quantities to the defaults for what gallery outputs you have on, turning the username flag on and off, disabling siphon and enabling NDI, all of that stuff, setting the username prefix. All of that stuff has an OSC command for it now. So you can completely abstract our UI to whatever you want it to look like. Isadora, Universe Control, Companion, whatever you use, you can break it out to that now and set it up however you want it. So that's my answer there. So yes, we do have a filter. It's the option in the subscription level, and that will set that list, and that should solve your problem. But if you want to do, as you start to explore more larger productions and more complex workflows, you might consider exploring the remote control options for this app, because that's really where it shines.
Very cool. Yeah,
I'm dancing over here, just so you know, Andy. You can't see me, but I'm dancing.
That's awesome. Yeah, Robert.
Yeah. Hi, Andy. I know this broken record question of mine, but with MBI 5, are there any changes in terms of accessing the interpretation channels on Zoom through ISO?
No, I wish. But I will tell you that Zoom acquired a company called Kite recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once those scientists have a little bit of time to get their office set up with Zoom, I think you'll be in good hands, because that company was a real leader in a lot of this translation and all of that workflow. And Zoom acquired them, and you can read this in the statement that they made. They acquired them expressly for the purpose of streamlining this translation workflow inside of the Zoom app. So I think there's a lot about to shake up in that pipeline, but no, there's nothing available to the SDK now. All that with NDI 5, we just have that's like coming from New Tech, right? So that's coming from them as an engine upgrade. Zoom's SDK they haven't updated their SDKs in months for us, so there's nothing really there to tell you about, unfortunately. But it would be very helpful.
Yeah, but when I read that statement from the going forward statement, they're really referring more to all of the translation and the online translation and the written translation, as opposed to the interpretation by people on the different channels. So
I think I agree with you that's what Kite is going to do, but I think that Zoom is going to introduce a new workflow for multilingual meetings, basically, is my point. So that like some of it will have the automation in there, but I think it's all going to get overhauled, I guess, is my point, and that there might be a new workflow for that.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. So if there aren't any other questions, the other big thing that's coming in the next update is embedded audio. Hooray! Because this is one that everybody wanted. And it's coming out in a couple of different forms here. So let me walk you through it. So in the next update, every NDI feed, NDI 4 or NDI 5, whichever version of the app you want, will have the muxed master audio in all of the outputs. And they'll be synced to the video output, and they'll be synced to each other. And the reason for that is that if you have multiple participants coming in and you're cutting between them and you're using audio follows video, they'll all be in sync. So when you cut from audio source A and B, there won't be any sort of like stutter or rollover when you do the transition between the video sources. Now, you might say, okay, well, that seems kind of weird. I would probably just take one of them and send that out to master and then not deal with any of the other ones. And the reality of it is that while they appear in sync, there actually is about 10 millisecond delta between them. So the lip sync is actually going to be stronger with the embedded feeds that are coming out than with just picking one and having it apply to all of them. And it's the app is sort of figuring that out and is adjusting the buffer to keep it synced as it goes through. This is laying the groundwork for the next feature, which is going to come not in this update, and but will be coming before, like hopefully in early September or end of the month, after, depending on how much testing we give it. Is actually putting the ISO audio for each user as a new option. So you'll be able to select, do you want the muxed audio in all the outputs, or do you want that participant's audio in that output? That would be similar to what like a Zoom room does, for example. And this is laying the groundwork for that, keeping that audio synced up with the participant as it tracks through is super tricky to do, and we're happy to be able to do that. And then with that, long term, is taking the audio and breaking it away from the NDI. So you have it in the NDI if you want it, but if you use Dante, then you're able to send it out to Dante Virtual Sound Card. That's the other thing we're working on right now. So you'll be able to then take, and this is what's going to blow your mind, is that like you could set up 32 outputs and put a person on each of them and send it into a 32 channel DVS and then out into a QL1 or whatever. At that point, you could do some, Leland, there we go. So that's what that's the next sort of iteration of that pipeline. Now that stuff is coming later, but this is the first step towards that. So the embedded audio should help people just get a nice synced output for the video, for the master audio, but it's not the ISO audio workflow yet. Then the ISO audio workflow will be introduced, and as part of that, it'll break out into the other architecture. My goal is that so to that question, Jonas, I think it depends on your definition of how many audio feeds can exist in a Zoom meeting, because at a technical level, technically speaking, again, only 3 are ever delivered to a given endpoint in any Zoom meeting, right? So in that sense, 3 is the magic number. What we're going to do is we're going to allow you, though, to output as many participants as we can. I think it'll probably, it depends on where our driver sort of starts to destabilize, but I think it'll be probably around 32. So don't quote me on it, but let's say it's 32. You might only have presence on any 3 of those at any given time because of the way that Zoom is sending the audio in, but you have the option to send it to any of those 32. So you can work as though they were isolated, up to 32, but then they'll only ever be simultaneous presence on 3 of them coming down from Zoom. So that's how I would think about it. And I don't think that you're going to have as many, you're probably not encoding that many videos, but we should be able to do a lot more audio outputs than we can video outputs just because of how the encoding pipelines are set up. So that'd be my guess. Again, it's still to be determined. This is the kind of thing we're actively developing right now, but it is in the roadmap, and you're going to see the first step towards that in the next update.
So if I could ask a quick question, Jeff, because I got to bail real fast.
Go ahead.
What I'm hearing is that if I have Zoom, ISO, vMix, and a Stream Deck, I could pretty much skip past the Zoom room and do at least 3 ups with that setup.
You should be able to, yeah. And I have a YouTube video on exactly that. I'll link you to that so that you can take a look.
Because I do a lot of 3 up. That's one of our main broadcasts, is just a 3 up. It's 2 hosts and a guest, and that would be a prime setup for what we're looking to do for our next iteration. So.
Absolutely. So let me just before you run, I'll find that video where I show it with vMix and the Stream Deck, and it's going to be linked in part to the video that we did just on the. I show you in one video how to set up the Stream Deck, and then another video how to use the Stream Deck with vMix. I'll link you to the vMix video, and then you can go out and find the other one. So that's the one there. I show you basically exactly that. You can route people to outputs, bring them into vMix, do your super source or multi-source, whatever you want, whatever they call it these days, and then
multi-view.
Yeah, multi-view.
Yeah. Keyword. All right, thanks, Andy. I appreciate it. Sounds like some great stuff, Jeff. I didn't mean to jump in, but I do have to fly. So thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem at all.
I'll talk to you, Jeff, later if you got time. Just give me a call.
All righty.
Thanks.
Hey, Andy.
Yes.
Would the same workflow be the same for Ecamm on a Mac as it would for vMix?
Yes. So Ecamm, you have a couple of options. Ecamm, if you're running it on the same Mac as Zoom ISO, you could bring the video inputs in via the Siphon protocol, which would be lower latency and lower processor overhead. And because Siphon is cool because it basically is allowing Ecamm to directly access the video memory of our app because they're running on the same box. Whereas NDI copies the video from the GPU to the CPU and then sends it to the network and then takes it from the CPU and puts it back on the GPU. So there's a lot more latency, a lot more processing copying of frames, things like that going on in NDI. But NDI has the advantage of it can work across your entire network, right? So if you have eCam on one computer and the ingest computer is a different computer, then NDI is really your only realistic option unless you're going out to hardware and using SDI or something like that. So you have that extra option with eCam if you're running them on the same machine, but generally speaking, yeah, the workflows should be pretty much identical. And we've started to work a lot with eCam users as well. I probably will do a tutorial on eCam specifically at some point once I get through the next sort of phase of work.
So I was going to ask about, I don't know if there's enough time on, your audio solution yet, but I'll ask anyways. Imagine having a 2-up, and they're, we're not only getting the Zoom ISO, but they're both getting muxed in as well. I didn't get a chance to get your update installed before we started today, so I can stand it up myself this afternoon later. But to stand them up and enable the audio on both of them at the same time,
yeah,
is it super noticeable?
Well, if you don't do anything in vMix and just ingest those NDIs and put them into a multi-up, it'll double the audio and it'll be twice as loud. Because it's literally pumping in both of them. So you need to set up a rule in vMix for which audio source you want to use when you're in that view. Now, that being said, when we have isolated audio, this will actually be to your advantage, because what will happen is when you have that multi-up, and again, you might not want it this way, so you have to kind of think about the structure of your show and whether this makes sense or not. But it could be the case that when you set that up and then you put that in program, you're only hearing the people you're seeing. And if somebody like a crew person is talking, you're not going to hear them because they're not in that visual. So it could be a really helpful way to reduce noise and things like that. So that could be interesting to look at.
Yeah. So there's a question from Rohit. The quick answer is yes. It's a new feature, actually. It's a checkbox, right, to remove the name now.
I can show that again.
ISO.
Let me, if I go back to vMix and draw your attention to here, this checkbox. And let me actually, I'll do this. I'm logged into After Hours right now with this computer. So let me take Carl's video feed here at 720p and then sort of float it up. All right, so you see the username in the bottom left? Turns it off there. So that's a little toggle that can turn it on and off. And then that is going to look the same in your output. So that won't be there. To confirm that, I'll just show you what that looks like inside of vMix itself. So if I cut away.
So these days from Zoom ISO, we're getting a perfectly clean, uncropped image from you these days, right?
Yep, that's right. So with this update, when it comes out, that'll be what that's all about. I need to take out my master audio, otherwise it'll.
The answer on some of it is.
Where is that? Here. Okay, great.
Argue.
Okay, great. So you can see Carl's name in the bottom left, and then I'm going to turn it off, and now it's gone. So off, on. And that's in vMix in the NDI output. If I cut to here, you can actually see what's going on inside of vMix. And if I bring up the audio there, you can actually see that there's meters coming in next to that NDI feed. And again, to show you there's no trickery there, I'm just clicking Zoom ISO 1, and there's my audio presence. So you can see that we do have audio coming in on this input. And if I created a couple more outputs, so if I went back to the Mac and I set up, let's say 3 outputs maybe, and then I grabbed other people who were on. So let me grab Dan, let's grab, who else is here in this call? Chris Fenwick. All right, you're my victim, Chris. Again, I'm not practicing what I'm preaching here. Typically, I would actually control this app from a Stream Deck or from Isadora, but that's not what I'm doing right now. And you can see it's kind of a pain when a large meeting is together. There's Chris. So now back on the vMix side, you can see that I have the same audio on all of these. And what's cool about it, and it's hard for me to show you this, if I were to quickly cut between these sources, you wouldn't notice from an audio perspective, if AFV is on, that there's a difference in the delay. It's super tight. So you should have
even point being, even while it's muxed audio. Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
So you could just use AFV through these sources, and your audio on the master output wouldn't be disturbed. Which is
Now, is the latest public released version of Zoom ISO have the remove name checkbox, or is that
Nope. Nope.
Okay.
It's still in the. It's going to be in the 1.1 update, but the 1.1 update isn't far away. This build that I'm working with right now is likely going to be it. The only other thing we're working on right now is bundling our audio driver with it, and so that just requires a little bit of some legal stuff. We're going through. We're licensing we're not inventing our own audio driver here. We're taking a really popular one from macOS, and we're licensing it. So I'm just waiting for that paperwork to go through, and then we'll put this build out. In the meantime, we're doing some cleanup testing and things like that, and we're going to adjust like the warning messages and some tutorial documents and things like that, to kind of the packaging of it. But the core engine's doing just fine right now. So as soon as that paperwork is signed, ink is dry on that, I can pump these out.
So what is I'm kind of thinking, we know we're just managing panels all day, you know. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I know that's going to be the gig tomorrow. Let's say that it's all panels, and and I want, where should that single source of audio? Zoom ISO is released with the ability for audio and so forth, but do I get the Zoom audio only, or do I ask Zoom ISO for a single? I don't think I can ask them for a single audio, or I could turn. I guess I could turn one audio. Will it be a separate audio channel? It will in vMix, right?
Yeah, each input will
even
have its
though
own.
you own your ISO video owns that audio output, I could just keep that particular audio channel up to manage the panel throughout the day, right?
Yep. So in that case, I would take the audio feed. Let's say I wanted Chris's audio to be the show audio in this case, and I didn't want to cut between. I would just set that to always on master, and I would turn off AFV. So AFV would come off, and that would go out to program. And that's going out to program right now. I'm going to turn it off. So I could turn that on there and turn off AFV on my other sources. And now Chris's audio is the program audio. And no matter what I cut to, it won't change that. And what we spent a lot of time on was making sure that the outputs from Zoom ISO remain in sync with each other and with each other's audio, so that you can do something like that. You can rely on an audio from one source if you
So
really
in vMix, I'm seeing, I haven't ever really paid attention to this. I'm adding a new NDI input in vMix. And before I select it and commit to it with the OK button, there's checkboxes along the bottom, low bandwidth and some acronyms. I don't even know what the hell they are. But one of them is audio only. And so I would guess if Zoom ISO is sending me video and muxed audio, or isolated at that, I could just say, oh, bring this in, but only grab the audio.
You could do that. And in fact, you could if you create an output in Zoom ISO that's blank, you don't assign a participant to it, you still get the audio on that. So you could create a blank NDI output from Zoom ISO, save yourself on the encoding overhead, and subscribe to basically a blank NDI feed and just grab the audio from it.
So, okay. So if I was managing three ups, but I created 4 outputs, I can tell the 4th output, which will never have video in it, to send the audio. Is that what you just said?
Yep. And again, with any audiovisual workflow, you should have a contingency for sync in mind. So in vMix, you can adjust with each individual source its delay relative to its provided audio channel. So you shouldn't forget those capabilities, because even Zoom itself might slip a little bit, like depending on how your presenter is set up. They might not be coming into Zoom in sync, and then it'll be coming out of Zoom out of sync as well, right? So, you should, and I'm going to say this every time that we talk about audio, you need to have comfort going out to the settings menu, going out in vMix at least, going over to audio settings, and being able to adjust this delay parameter appropriately, and do that per input. I tell this story sometimes. This is a setting that I have adjusted even before I had created Zoom OSC or Zoom ISO or any of it. even when I'm just capturing regular zoom, I am making 10 millisecond adjustments very, very often in each of my pinning computers or whatever it is. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you have a rack of pinning computers, their audio relative to each other might not be the same because of the way that the zoom reflector is communicating to them. So in any video production workflow, Zoom ISO or not, you should have comfort in your vision mixer or whatever pipeline it is you're using to be able to slide your video and audio back and forth until they're in sync, and to be able to do that on a per input basis versus just a program basis, right? Because you have multiple points of audio ingest, you need multiple points of sync. If you have just one audio source on the whole program that you know is synced to that, you just have to slide them once, that's a different story. But you should, and again, in vMix, it's just going through the settings panel and setting it there. But in every professional production program, there's going to be some way to do that. Even in some virtual audio cables have the ability for you to dial in the delay as well inside of the cable. So always be comfortable with that. And you may have to deploy that with Zoom ISO. We try to do the things though that keep it as minimal as possible. So maybe 10 milliseconds adjustments will still be warranted, but we're trying to, like, we're not being lazy about it. We're not just like dumping audio and the video out there and not trying to sync it up. There is an active effort inside of the software to keep things coordinated, but there's only so much we can do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool.
Let me see. One other thing, less consequential, but in my mind, it was kind of fun. I'll point you to the Office Hours GitHub, where we've started to develop some open source projects, and they cover a variety of use cases. But one of the ones that was really fun was this Black Siphon configurator. Black Siphon is something that we recommend a lot when it comes to using Zoom ISO with SDI. The problem with Black Siphon is it was last updated in 2014 and it has no remote control options, blah, blah, blah. I've actually reached out to the people who created Black Siphon to see if I can buy it off of them and then open source it for everybody. But the Black Siphon configurator is an Apple script that allows you to just, in the sort of the header of the script, set all the parameters up, and then when you run the script, it'll just find that window, adjust all of the different settings the way you want them, and let it go. I made this for the 090 system that we're using for office hours, but I open sourced it for everybody to be able to use. So if you do need a way to trigger a, because of all of the settings in Zoom ISO that can be remote controlled, I wanted you to be able to go all the way from launching the app, joining the meeting, setting up the outputs, to setting up the SDI outputs. I wanted that entire chain to be remote controllable. And the Black Siphon app was the only thing that wasn't in my control to be able to add those remote control features for. So rather than modifying the app, I just created an Apple script that allows you to adjust those parameters. And if you want to remote control that, what you do is you put it in a program like Osculator, where you can set up a relationship between an OSC input and an Apple script execution. You can do this in QLab as well, but Osculator is going to be cheaper for what you need to do there. So like $16, $17, depending on how many you buy, you can say, hey, here's my Apple script, here's my OSC command coming into it, and then that OSC command will trigger that Apple script. So at that point, now you have an OSC command to configure Black Siphon the way you want it. So between all that, now that workflow can be completely automated from start to finish for the hardware guys. So that should be a lot of fun.
Wow.
I think I can actually
gifts upon gifts.
I can show that in action too, because it is kind of visually fun to see. Let me set up that real quick and then I'll let you take a look at that. But if I switch my video feed just real quick, because I'm proud of this one. Let's go back to the Mac. Where is the Mac? Over here. All right. So Osculator, I'm just going to open up the Office Hours 2.0 script. There it is. And all I have to do now, if I want to set up this system where I've got my 8 outputs, I want to configure 4 of them. So I'm just going to go over to Isadora on my main computer and hit the remote control command. And you'll see that if I turn on siphon outputs, sorry about that, here we go. I'm going to run the script now. And it just completely remote controls Black Siphon and sets up all the outputs automatically in like 2 seconds. Wow. So now that thing is ready to go. It's already sending SDI outputs into my ATEM just with one remote control command from Isadora running on a different computer. I can run it again because I think it's fun to look at. So it's selecting the outputs from the siphon feed by name, and it's selecting the video format to use, which I'm saying 2997. And you don't have to know anything about Apple scripts to use this, because I try to make it really easy. So if you look at the script, I'm just saying select output 1, set it to the name this, which is the siphon feed that we're using, right? And then set it to 1080p 2997, and then do it for 2 and do output 3. So it's 1, 3, 2, 4, because that's how a decklink is set up, odd numbers and then even numbers. So all you have to do is just modify this section of the code where really you're just saying, okay, I want this named siphon feed to be on this output number with this format. And all you have to do is copy paste that for the number of outputs that you want. And then you can just, again, run the script and it'll just go through and it'll automatically do the rest of it for you because everything's organized into functions. So you don't really have to tool with any of the Apple scripts because it did it for you. The functions are down here. If you're curious, it's just a bunch of tells and clicks to the, it's finding the right names and all that stuff. But yeah, that's what that's about. So again, maybe not relevant for everybody, but it certainly was a lot of fun, and it's going to be essential for the setup process of office hours. So
yeah, that's cool. All right. Is there are there any other specific demos in particular that are associated with the audio? I mean, what's it look? I don't know if we've seen the dialogue. So this is what it looks like. This is what you have to do to get audio from a Zoom.
it's going to show up by default now in all of the outputs.
Gotcha.
So it'll just be present.
Whether
we might add when we get to the future updates where we allow you to actually configure these parameters, there'll be an interface to manage it all from. But for now, at most we might have a global on-off, but there's not going to really be a lot of other UI.
So you're not going to put it on the matrix and have it configurable per.
Not yet, because it's the same audio on everything. So when we get to the point of being able to choose the audio of certain participants, then that'll be a different story, and we'll address that at that time. But for right now, when it's just muxed audio on all outputs, we're not probably going to build out all that UI infrastructure. But there'll be, as you can expect, when we roll that out, there's going to be OSC commands for all of that. There's going to be everything. It'll be kind of built up in a very specific way, so that it can be remote controlled and can be treated like a matrix and all that stuff. Things that we're trying to do with this app. So
yeah, if you're going to manage your video switching from, let's say, your Stream Deck to output assignment in Zoom ISO, I can imagine when we get to isolated audio that we can manage our muting on and off the same way as well. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Quite cool. Simpler than mucking around in Zoom.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's for sure. Yeah. Cool.
Let's see, is there a question in the chat here? In your tours, it says you can use 4 1080 outs for an ISO based on the Mac for MacBook Air. M1 8 gig, is 4 still enough? You think we can increase the number? As of now, I can take 8 outputs at 360. Yeah, okay. So M1's a really good processor. There are some differences between the MacBook Air and like the MacBook Pro in terms of how the M1 is configured and its power targets and all of that stuff, and the number of like GP modules in it and all of that. But so I haven't tested the MacBook Air specifically, but what I can generally say is that when I have 8 outputs cooking on my M1 over here, I'm not, the entire system is not above 25% system usage. Like there's plenty of headroom. So my understanding is that the MacBook Air and the M1 Mac Mini are relatively close, in terms of performance abilities. The MacBook Air is definitely lighter in terms of its horsepower, but it's not that big of a delta that's going to matter. What does matter is how you treat the Zoom reflector. So the number of outputs that you can get at a certain resolution in Zoom ISO is part determined by can you actually encode them, and it's part determined by can you actually get them from Zoom in the first place. So let's recap that real quick. So not every Zoom meeting is a 1080p meeting. In fact, by default, they're all 360p meetings. How do you get to 720 first? Well, you can have an account with Group HD enabled. You can have a Zoom room call in. You can have an SIP device, I believe, come in. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do. Facebook portal, personal collaboration devices, those sort of things. They call into a Zoom meeting, hang out in the waiting room or the meeting for 30 seconds, pop out. That meeting is now 720p. So if you have a 360p account, but you have a Facebook portal, now you can get to 720p. If you were to say in Zoom ISO, hey, give me 720p, but you're in a 360p meeting, it's going to give you 720, but it's going to be scaled, 360 scaled to 720. So you won't actually get, and you can confirm that when you look at the Zoom receiving statistics in Zoom ISO, you can see, hey, I'm actually only getting 360, and that's why. So let's say, okay, you got Group HD enabled. did Group HD enablement go to 720 or 1080 is the next question. Because to get 1080 is a different intervention. The only way to get that, as far as I'm aware, is to email Zoom support or to be on an account that has already gone through this process. So you go and they say, yep, okay, now you're 1080. You write out this email. It's basically like, look, I'm dealing with, government officials or special talent or, theater work or education. You tell them out your story. You try to tell them that you're evaluating Zoom for that workflow, and this is a pivotal part of whether you use the platform or not. Support comes back to you a couple days later, says, yep, we turned that on. You go into your backend portal, you say, yep, my meeting should be 1080. You set that setting there. Now you're at 1080. Again, 1080 be capable. So are the people in that meeting able to do 1080? That's the next step. All right, so let's say you did all that. You got 1080 people, 1080 capable meeting. You got video participants who can come in at 1080 now, and you have a computer that can decode 1080. Here's the rules that people don't talk about. So the Zoom reflector can send to any given endpoint no more than 5 1080p 30 FPS feeds at a time. Once you add the 6th feed, it drops the FPS down to like 15. And that is coming from the Zoom side. So Zoom ISO is not receiving 6 1080p 30 feeds anymore. It's receiving 6 15 FPS 1080p feeds. Your Zoom receiving statistics will say 1080, but you look at the frame rate and it says 15. And that's not because your system can't handle it. It's because Zoom can't handle sending it to you on that one computer, or it's not configured to be able to do that. So the magic number for 1080 is 5. For 720p, I'm able to get to 8 or 9 sometimes. I haven't really determined which it is. I'm going to say 8 because it's safe. So in the next Zoom ISO update, the warning flag is going to show up at 5 instead of 4 because that's a change since the last time we updated. Zoom has made some changes to these rules. So 5 at 1080, 8 or 9 at 720, unlimited number at 360. Again, unlimited in the sense that there's no rule imposed by Zoom about that. That's going to be more dependent on the capabilities of your hardware to decode them. So it's a big puzzle, and it's really hard to explain in a concrete and concise way. Try to walk through it a bit on the website in terms of like the graphic and all that. But the language that we're going to basically say, because it's all complicated, we're going to say, oh yeah, 5 HD outputs is what we're going to say. In reality, you might be able to get to 8 or 9 if you do 720p or if you have the right meeting conditions. But I tried to write it all out, and just became this really complex thing with tons of asterisks everywhere. And I'm like, okay, we're just going to simplify the messaging and say 5. But you should know that you can probably get to 8 or 9 720p outputs from an M1 Mac Mini. And I believe that your MacBook Air will probably be able to do similarly. But if you try to do that at 1080, it's not going to work. So 5 would be your target. And I believe that MacBook should be able to do 5 1080s. Really, every Mac that we've tested that was manufactured in the last 3 to 5-ish years has been able to do our base specs. They've been able to decode as much as the Zoom reflector will send them. Every now and then somebody will ask me about like a 2015 MacBook Air, and I'll be like, yeah, it's not working, and it's on High Sierra, and I'll be like, yep, that's out of spec. Sorry. Minimum operating system is going to be Mojave, and that's just kind of we have to cut it off somewhere. So, but that's how you can think about that. If you have a Mac that's relatively recent, and you have your meeting set up properly, your guests set up properly, all that stuff is handled, then you should be able to do this on that hardware.
What I don't remember who it was that was in the last OSC test kitchen that was asking about it, but the conversation was around increased internet bandwidth. And so my external bandwidth actually increases.
Oh yeah, Bill was talking about that.
Yeah, well, it was Bill. Yeah, so when I have like 1 1080 Zoom ISO versus 4, it actually not only does it put more burden on my LAN, but in fact it does have more data to pull from the Zoom servers as well, right?
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that, and then Jonas, I'll bring you in there. But from what I've done and when I've tested, yeah, you should receive 6 megabit per second down from the Zoom reflector for each 1080p 30 FPS feed that you subscribe to. So while you're going to be exporting that NDI at 50 megabit per second, you're going to realistically, you're going to be receiving them at 6. So they come in at 6, they go out at 50. So you add 4, 6 by 4, 24 megabit coming down from the Zoom reflector. Now you have to add a little bit of margin on top of that if you have a gallery view open, if you have the primary and the secondary window going a screen share, and plus the audio overhead for all that, you're going to be north of that, but your start is going to be somewhere around the 24. Now, other apps handle this differently though. There was a question in comparison to Videocom Bridge, which again is a cool app. It's a little bit of a different approach to getting outputs from Zoom, but it's a cool app nonetheless. The problem with that app is that it literally rejoins the meeting and launches a new instance of itself for every additional output that you add. So that's why Bill was seeing these huge steps every time he was adding an output in that app, and why it was less clear whether that applied to Zoom ISO as well. Zoom ISO is only requesting an additional 6 megabit per second feed for every 1080 that you add. Video Bridge is requesting an entire new session of the Zoom application, which again I don't fault them for this. They're using the Electron SDK, and this is the only option that they have is to relaunch all of that. And
that's not only a bandwidth hit, but that's a big CPU resource
so
and memory hit too.
They cap out before the Zoom reflector limitations come in, because they are eating up the entire CPU by relaunching themselves over and over and over again. So Zoom is processing the entire event management chain for each output that they add, per my understanding. Again, I'm not trying to dig on the app. I'm just saying that you should be aware when you're building these systems that there are differences in the ways they all do similar things at the end of the day, but they're completely different architectures to get there. And a Zoom room, don't even get me started, right? A Zoom room takes over the entire computer, so there's not even a question about what else you're doing on there at that time, right? So it's a different equation. But Jonas, did you have any other thoughts on that beyond what I said?
Talking about bandwidth, I was wondering if does Zoom ISO work with a local reflector?
That'd be really cool. I want to try that if we get access to a local reflector at office hours, because that'd be nice, because that means that I'd have to worry less about synchronization, because it would be
that was my whole thought, because also it's my hardware, not Zoom managing it. So I push out updates.
The local reflector won't necessarily help you with sync, because the sync problems can happen elsewhere. But
right, but it reduces it. Basically, what I'm saying is that, let's say we go back to the office hour situation where there's a rack of computers on the same network, and that thing is directly networked to the reflector. We're not as worried about the latency in connections between those Macs and the reflector where we would be on the general WAN.
Sure,
we know that route. Now, of course, there's a million other things in the chain to worry about, but the one of the hardest synchronization problems to fix inside of Zoom is when you have multiple Zoom clients connected to the same meeting, and you have to match one audio source for the entire group, because they might not even be self-synced compared to the other meetings. So it's not like you just have a global offset for every computer. That'd be one thing, but the distance between the participants in that receiving could be all over the place. So that's a very complicated sync to fix. And so our solution was input by input syncing across the entire ecosystem, which is what we're doing in our audio update. But that's literally applying effort to every single sync, where it would be so much nicer to not have to worry about Mac to Mac synchronization and just worry about it across the board. So but yeah, you're right. There's other considerations. I shouldn't oversimplify it. But
how are you doing that sync, or can you talk about it?
Yeah. We talked a little bit about it at the top of the show, but no, it's fine.
Got here late.
So the sync, what we're doing is we're embedding audio in all the outputs, and then we're punting it to the Vision Mixer to do the sync. But we're giving you the option to do that because it's present on all the outputs, so you can kind of configure it however you want, and then you can assign your.
So you're not doing it. You're just adding output. You're just adding audio.
We're not doing it yet. There might be a thing in the future where we add that in as a dialable option. What we are doing though is we're making sure that the audio is present on all the sources so that you can sync them up with whatever reference source that you want, which was the thing that I always struggled with, because I have always been syncing even my vanilla Zoom captures, right? When I had everything running in the same room, multiple Zoom meetings, pinning computers coming in, I still was syncing things inside of vMix, 10 milliseconds here, 10 milliseconds there, either way. And that's not going to change with our app, because it's still Zoom at the end of the day. And sometimes
there's no magic.
Right, exactly. Zoom sometimes doesn't even deliver the participant in sync, or they have something on their end that's out of sync, which is sending them in out of sync, and it's not getting resolved, obviously. So While I'm going to claim that our outputs are synced, in terms of the audio and the video should come out in sync, I don't think that alleviates, or I wouldn't endorse a workflow that didn't have the option to independently adjust input by input audio sync delay. And that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time. Every night I Google Zoom ISO in quotes, Zoom OSC in quotes, and do the same thing on Facebook to try to find any mention. And the thing that I always fight about with people on Facebook is how how sync should, it's one thing to sync the output, it's another thing to be prepared to sync the output, and
Yeah.
right.
Totally.
Yeah, well, in sync, it's interesting because I mean, like, you could probably get by with saying your bits are synced, right? Because as they come in, they go out, and you keep them lined up. But that doesn't necessarily represent that that audio bit was synced to my lips when I said it, when then you received it, right?
But
So
who's
you're
in
gonna
trouble every
keep
time
it
it
locked out
happens?
of sync? Yeah,
Yeah,
you
but
know, so-
it's always going to be, we're going to get the support ticket.
yeah, no.
Why is this
true,
out of
that's
sync,
true.
Andy?
Yeah, George.
George.
So, and I probably hate to say this. I remember this from a long time ago. So Wi-Fi will bite you in the behind when using NDI. And I hate to say that I had on Wi-Fi on all my machines. And while we were talking here, I just say, you know what? I just remembered I can't have on Wi-Fi. So I've been chasing my tail for days. So it's Wi-Fi. So if you have Wi-Fi on, it will cause you problems.
And we're all smiling because you're completely out of sync right now coming into the meeting.
I have no idea why I'm out of sync.
Oh,
Like
you're
a half
way
a
out of
second
sync.
out
You
of
are
sync.
making my point. For me, this is great.
I'm probably gonna go out and come back. Are you almost done, Jeff, or you still going?
Oh no, we'll be here. I think we'll be
I'm
here for a little while anyway.
I'm gonna do a
30
reboot.
minutes maybe. Yeah, okay. Hey, Andy, so can you talk, see if this makes sense? Let's say I know I've got a panel of 12 folks. Out of the entire meeting of 500, I know that 12 are going to be the ones I manage. And so I want to, so I'm asking you, describe, benefits, pros, cons, natural behavior, like from Zoom ISO and Zoom to LAN to, best practice, or you probably shouldn't do it that way. And so I want to set up 12 outputs because Zoom ISO is not going to tell me I can't, right?
It'll warn you. It actually will warn you, but it'll let
will
you
warn me.
It'll let you go past
But
it
it'll
if you
still
want.
let me
Yeah.
create like
Yeah.
12 1080 outputs. Now, what I'm talking about is realistically what I'm going to be able to get, you said, is 6 1080s, five maximum 1080 feeds from the Zoom servers, which is fine because, my panel never actually exceeds 4 active speakers, let's say, right? So I'm just trying to establish those parameters and behaviors and decisions on, have them all sitting there queued up. If my 4 active ones I can actively serve, and Zoom ISO dynamically does that. But when those 4 change to the next 4, even though those 4 were kind of sitting there at 360 the whole time because Zoom just wouldn't have served them up to you, right? If I got past that 5.
So there's some things you can do and some things you can't do in that setting.
Yeah. So how adaptive is it? Yeah.
So here's what doesn't happen. If you set 12 outputs and you set them all to 1080p, Zoom will actually give you 12 1080p videos, but all of them will be at low FPS, even the ones that you wanted to have at high
All
FPS.
right. So
you don't want to do that.
know.
So what you can do though is you can do 2 things. There's 2 different workflows that you could think about here. First one is only create the number of outputs for the number that you're actually going to use at any given time. And then use the OSC commands to reroute like a video matrix who's going into those inputs. And then let everything down the chain think about input numbers versus people. And let your Stream Deck be the thing that relates people to input numbers.
Now, can I, on my Stream Deck, let's say, hey, these are my 4 active people, boom. Not only have I, on my Stream Deck, assigned them to Zoom ISO outputs, but I've also switched their low res setting to a high res.
So that was the second thing I was going to say. So your other option would be set 12 outputs all at 360. Then when you migrate people in do a combination command that routes them to that output and then elevates the output to 1080p. And then just kind of self-police yourself to make sure that you're not ever exceeding that number of updates. And you can do that in companion really easily and prevent yourself
Yeah.
from going over that.
So
But,
how
yeah.
quick is that? Are we gonna see a boxed video, get better momentarily on those 360s?
It would look the same as it does in Zoom when you resize a window. So you kind of you get there and then it pops up, clears up. So you could build a workflow out where you maybe have you use all 5, and before you bring the person to air, you put them in input 5 while they're off, get them to 1080, and then bring them in, and then it's clean, or not. So it's kind of up to you. But there's you see those kind of 2 modalities where it's like you can be prepared for everything that's ever going to happen, have all the inputs assigned and ready, and then start bumping resolutions around and allocating resolution and do all of that. Or you can say, I'm a video matrix. I have a theoretical number of inputs for every participant, but in reality, I'm only going to activate the ones that I need at any given moment. And some people are more comfortable with one, some people are more comfortable with the other. I know that like in the office hours system, originally I had built it in the first way where it was like only pull in the people that we want in the locations that we actually want them for display in the multi-view, because everything's automated, so it didn't really matter. But Alex's point was that like that's chaos for a technical director when their inputs are reassigning themselves to different locations. Like how are you going to cut to the host if the host is like in 15 different places over the course of the hour, right? So it's just a different way of thinking. With rotating panels of groups, I'm kind of fine with that because I don't need to consider the same 4 people in theory after, like when I'm in this mode of the show, I'm only in this mode of the show. And I don't have to be able to reach anybody in the panel. The show is, got a certain architecture that office hours doesn't have because it's a fully interactive conversation where anybody can be at any point needing to be on screen. So in that scenario, yeah, we went sort of the like populate everything all the time and then deal with it later in the chain and adjust as needed. Now his solution was just throw more hardware at the problem. Your solution will be just allocate resolution based on what you're dealing with at the moment. But as I say, in the next Zoom ISO version, there is an OSC command to set ISO size for an input number, and you can set it to 360 all the way from 180 to 2160. So you can play with that resolution on the fly and make that part of your companion.
Well, and the other thing is when it's a panel and I've got a 3-up, I mean, do I really need 1080? You know what I'm saying? I mean, like 720 would probably be pretty suffice, only because I'm sharing potentially a 1080 space with 3 or 4 people, and so I could get by with less than. Okay, yeah, good. Just knowing, that's what the kitchen is all about, man. Knowing the behaviors that are happening kind of behind the scenes and planning for them and being prepared. Thanks for that.
Absolutely.
So we talked about Aaron as well, and a few others who dropped in maybe a little bit later than top. Also the NDI5 support, and it'll be separate. Andy said have separate distributions, right? One for an NDI4 version versus NDI5. It won't be one for both, and then it's up to us to kind of prepare the rest of our network, right, and hardware and so forth, that vMix in my instance, and so everything is version aligned.
So I'd love to hear what people think the benefits of NDI5 in this workflow are. I'm curious about that in this sort of Zoom.
Who took notes? I tried.
Was that asked already?
I tried to walk through that, but no. I think that'd be good. I want to hear somebody else explain it.
I think the biggest, I mean, the one that stands out the most to me is the RUDP, right? Is the faster protocol, being UDP historically, right, is always been faster because it's kind of a message in the bottle delivery. But now with the reliability, tagged to the front, it's kind of the best of the both worlds, right? Without the heavy TCP footprint on it for all the acknowledgements that have to happen on that protocol. So I think that's a biggie. Now, is that truly measurable and beneficial, on a local LAN? I mean, everything's measurable, but I don't think I feel like I'm in a place of struggle, but I haven't had meters on things either. I mean, are we changing things even on a LAN by 10, 20, 30 milliseconds because of just the protocol improvement? So I'll let you go from there, Andy.
The big one for this workflow is native Apple Silicon, because that allows us to recommend very squarely a 699 Mac Mini with the M1 chip as the computer for Zoom ingest, because it should be able to do the full amount of bandwidth the Zoom reflector can send to it. And now that NDI5 is native on Apple Silicon, it won't have micro stuttering or poor scalability or any of that stuff.
Yeah, all the weird emulation crap. Yeah,
exactly. So that
I
makes
think
it
what
so
would
easy
be
to
a
recommend.
cool slide to see. Not that I'm not saying that that's something you have to build, but I think you could pretty easily build it, or many of us could. Is what's that one $6.99 box produce with Zoom ISO on it versus what physical footprint? Kind of, what would Greg Gibson's desk turn into if he converted it from a laptop that was limited to two outputs and the physical monitors that were there. He also implements dongles, but I mean, the footprint, the price footprint, the real estate footprint, the power footprint, I mean, everything.
So here's the thing that blows my mind. If I'm right about this adapter that I'm checking on, $699 Mac Mini, $320 or $340 of adapters, these two adapters, some patch cables, and an A10 Mini, well under $1,500 all in, and has the capability of a hardware ecosystem for Zoom. If that actually works, that's going to be, I think, pretty crazy. Go to the NDI side for a second. I was talking to Jonathan yesterday about this, where Sonnet sells an enclosure that you take two Mac Minis and put them in, and then it breaks out all the I/O to the back. So for NDI, this is a dream, because you network them up and send them out. And now you have a blade that can do, what is that, like 16 720p outputs and like 10 1080 outputs from each blade unit that you're throwing in there, and no monitors attached unless you want them, and you could remote session in with a dongle to manage all of that, right? Now scale it up even further, go back to HDMI, put those dongles in it. Now you've got 10 HDMI ports or SDI ports with the DeckLink cards going in it. I mean, you can have a very, very dense high output number. I mean, I think this kind of stuff is what's going to kill Skype TX in broadcast studios. Like, there'll be no reason, because a Skype TX box is 4 outputs and it's like a 3U,
One of the things, though, that Skype TX does really well is the user experience.
Yes.
And the sort of plug and play nature of it, right? I don't think it's good, but I mean, I think it could be better, but I think that's something that, having it sort of provision itself and start up and have like a web control panel that you could say, go join this meeting and I need 5 outputs and I need whatever. I think that would be killer, and something you should consider, because it's all fine having a GUI, but I don't think that's the way people will want to interact with Zoom anything, right? At this level.
I completely agree with you. And actually, earlier in the show, we were talking about questions about the user interface of the app, and I basically got to the point where I said, yeah, we have most of the things that you're asking about, but I don't want you to use any of them, because what I want you to do is I want you to hook into the remote control capabilities and control it from a centralized Isadora instance. But I agree with you as well that, like, to actually replace this in a broadcast studio, what it needs to do is self-spawn a server, you sign into it, pretty web interface, launch it into the meeting, do all that stuff. And I think that what we're trying to do is prove the workflows.
Totally.
And once we've got that, revisit.
I mean, we're evolving into this.
Right, exactly. But I see the trajectory, and I agree with you on that.
Yeah, next week in the Zoom OSC Test Kitchen, Andy will debut the fully automated integrated Zoom call manager,
But it's not that hard. For a show, I built this interface in like...
No, it's not hard. Nobody said it was hard. I think,
yeah.
No, I didn't mean it was hard. It just needed to be done.
Yeah, but a broadcaster, like what they would pay normally to integrate it, they should just hire an integrator that writes that thing in like a week, tests it,
And they
And then
might.
it's
They
how they
might.
want it.
They might.
That's the kind of stuff that's exciting to me. Yeah, George.
Jeff, can I share a screen real quick?
Who just asked me that?
George Kennedy.
George.
George, okay. I mean, I'll do it via co-host, George. There you go.
All right. Maybe this will work.
Yeah.
Or do I need to put my screen?
I love Sonnet because of this kind of stuff.
Oh, you can see that?
Yeah, I can see
So
it, yeah.
this was Andy was talking about. Sorry, Andy.
No.
But
Yeah.
if you're a freelancer like I am and work in the field a lot, I'm a big fan of them. I've been using this stuff for years, but these are some of the configurations Andy was talking about. These are the new Duomodo boxes, but you can absolutely build especially for Zoom ISO. If you're going to begin to use it out in the field, this is definitely going to be what you want to look at building for just headless. If you're walking into a show where you maybe just the operator of Zoom ISO and you just want to take your equipment and put it in line, this is what you would want to build out that system with. But I'm a big fan of their boxes, and you really could build out some really cool chassis out of it. Sorry, Andy, I just wanted to show a little bit more on that you were talking about.
This is great because it's this is like these are the kind of things that need to happen for Zoom to really shake up broadcast sector, right? And so like that's scalable infrastructure. So like take Alex's system for example as well. Like right now I told him to go buy those, he didn't buy them. It is what it is. He got the external boxes, but like he just went and bought another Mac, another enclosure, and can throw that right into his hardware ecosystem. He can blade up, as much as he wants at this point to be able to add additional ingest capabilities to his system.
As we call it in the IT industry, it's horizontally scalable.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. Exactly.
Which means infinite.
which practically means vertically scaled because it's in a rack going up like that. But yeah.
Scale up, scale across, yeah. Very cool.
And then we got to get Dante audio, I guess.
Well, that was the other thing. Aaron, you missed all the stuff.
I should just go and watch it.
No, so what the long-term plan is.
I meant to come earlier, but I had to go get my son.
No, that's all good. I don't blame you for that. But the long-term, and by long-term I mean early fall, is we will give you the ability to log Zoom ISO into a meeting, select like 32 different participants, and dump them out into Dante Virtual Sound Card. And then you're out in Dante land at that point. We're laying the groundwork for that in this next update where the audio is going to begin to show up. Then there'll be another update that allow the automatic routing to the of the 3 incoming feeds to the right participants and all that. And then there'll be an expansion of that breaks it off the NDI and allows you to go out into proper audio management systems. So that's the roadmap, and that's where we're going with that. And I agree with you that Dante is the next step. Hey, George.
And forgive me if my sync is still off. I'm not sure what's going on with Zoom this afternoon, or maybe it's just my camera.
That's pretty good.
You're better now.
So I have 3 Zoom rooms. So obviously we've been at, I can't ask you because it's your product, but when are we gonna just do away with Zoom rooms, guys? Those of you that are kind of pushing towards Zoom ISO, because obviously as an industry we could do more with it.
If you want an honest answer, there are some workflows where I will never use a product that relies on Zoom's SDK after seeing it, which is the one last thing why a lot of people that I talk to are like, yeah, I would love to integrate Zoom ISO, but especially if you plan a lot of freelancers that work in my field, deploy it and then never see the infrastructure again. I would be scared to put anything on an SDK there, but that might improve with Zoom improving the SDK. And the one thing where Zoom rooms are helpful is getting it in the cloud, basically. I'm still waiting on Zoom ISO for the cloud. I just hope Jeff forgot to tell the people that that's coming.
The last surprise.
Yeah.
That's tomorrow in the Zoom test kitchen.
Right. I'm trying. I will say that there's a roadmap for it. It just relies on stuff from Zoom that doesn't exist yet, and I'm told that that has a roadmap as well, and I've heard what that roadmap is. So I'm thinking, yeah, sure, but I don't have it in hand yet, and I've been burned before. I didn't
Are
get
you
didn't get multi spotlight for 6 months, so I I don't know how much I want to stake on that.
have you tested Zoom ISO with the new focus mode?
No, I haven't actually.
Because
It's been
Yeah,
out for mere
yesterday I-
hours. Come on, man.
I know.
yeah,
I was too busy building the bat signal to to test focus mode.
because I tested it.
It's much
and
more
it,
fun.
It could be like for gym classes and teaching stuff. There are some real nice applications, and even for us nerdy little Germans that like to do stuff on Zoom, but our GDPR people hate us for that. They like the focus mode because it doesn't transmit the video to everybody.
Right. The cool thing that might work out of the box. And you're looking at it, did it work like hide non-video participants in terms of like there were just people who weren't showing up in the view?
It's kind of strange how it works. As soon as you enable it, it freezes on the last frame that you have gotten from that person.
But they still show up in the view?
They show up in the gallery view as non-video participants.
As non-video participants?
Well, depends. If you switch around a little bit, the last frame
Oh, God.
clears,
Oh,
but the
great.
last frame sticks. So we got like super confused in testing. And if you need a meeting, I have everything set up. I can
Yeah.
start one.
So I think that the intuitive thing that would work out of the box would be gallery addressing in Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC, because that would allow you to piggyback off of who was present from the focus mode. If they're
I
Yeah.
think if you can make Zoom ISO co-host, it should be able to see everybody.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
otherwise,
yeah. Otherwise, that's a problem. Yeah. But I was so proud that we didn't need to be a co-host. Zoom rooms have to be co-hosts.
it's not documented. Not that I'm better. But they have ISO audio. Just saying.
They do.
And they have a nice little notification that makes my GDPR people happy. It's so stupid. Like for some stuff, I'm not like for some productions, I would not even be allowed to like use Zoom ISO because it's from an American firm, and
I think those people don't read the GDPR very well. But okay.
I had at some point there was somebody giving me a really hard time for GDPR. This is in the early days of Zoom OSC, and they were mad about like something that was actually, I looked at it and it was totally GDPR compliant, and they were just like losing their minds over it. And it was like, okay, well, our lawyer looked at it and it's totally compliant. But they kept just berating us, and so they weren't being nice to our customer support person. So I took over the email and I said, okay, what country are you from? And I said, hey, I'm from whatever country it was. And I said, okay, this country is no longer allowed to use this app. And it was like, okay, that's it. We're not selling here anymore. You're not allowed to use it. If you use it, you're breaking my terms. So that was it. Never heard again from them on that one. I cut off all of Belgium, sorry, or something like that.
yeah, Zoom is like super strange for being like a service provider, because Zoom gives you so much information about people that join. It's like creepy, and you're like, I don't like that information. Can we please not have that? But yeah,
I would rather them tell you that they have it than say they don't have it and not give it to you and actually have it. There's some value in transparency, I suppose.
the other thing with Zoom ISO that would be interesting is I might have missed your answer while switching between phone and desktop. Can I get, as soon as you implement ISO audio, can I get ISO audio for the active speaker?
So there'll be a mode in one of the outputs that will allow you to. So there's a mode drop down in the UI. It doesn't do anything right now, but the mode is going to be like user, active speaker, screen share, gallery, whatever. Like you'll be able to choose, kind of like a Zoom room, but active speaker will be one of those. And I think it wouldn't be a problem for us to take the. Do you want master audio, or do you want just the
Active
participant
speaker ISO audio. And the
ISO audio?
problem that
Okay.
I found with that is because
I see. What you mean.
the active speaker OSC output is like behind a little bit, so I couldn't
Try the,
do that in vMix.
Try the is speaking output. That one's really fast.
Do you have that in Zoom OSC?
In Windows. In
Oh.
the beta that I gave you. It's not in the documentation yet. But in the version that I gave you, there's a new output. It's called is speaking and stopped speaking. And that is basically just the raw, like, is there
That's
audio presence
amazing.
coming from this user? And so that should help you quite a bit, because that'll survive spotlighting and all that stuff too in screen share. So when there is no active speaker canonically, that output still works. And it's very fast. Because the active speaker, more accurately, is the yellow box. So when you see the
Yeah.
yellow box move inside of Zoom OSC, that's when you get the message, but
Yeah.
not necessarily when that person starts speaking. However, the is speaking is more related to the audio icon in the participant list that jumps up and down. When you see that change, that's when you get an is speaking, and that's almost immediate.
I'll check that out. That will be very helpful.
Yep, it's just camel case. It's an output. It's is and then capital S speaking, and then stop speaking is when they end.
We emptied your bag of tricks, Andy, for the day.
Got through quite a bit.
Got a weekend ahead of you. We'll be back.
Yeah.
Or more.
You'll have Jonathan with you next week. I'll be out of town. So give him a hard time with, with some of that stuff.
Yeah, well, I'll have some time to play with it between now and then and provide a little feedback and share with
That's
everybody.
great. We, as I say, the last thing we're doing right now is, besides some of these quality of life fixes in the UI, is we're waiting for the license for the audio driver that we are going to use. We didn't go build our own audio driver. We took a very popular multi-channel audio driver for macOS, and we just bought it out. So we're going to put that into that app, and we're just working now on the last sort of trinkets of the legal process on that.
Cool.
Yeah, George.
So whenever Zoom gets you your Windows, whatever, how long do you think you'll be able to implement that and have it on a Windows platform?
So we're already building it with the expectation that eventually somewhere in the abyss of the Zoom SDK, there'll be something to hook into to get the video frames. So we're going to try to, it's kind of crazy to build like that, to be honest with you. It's like we're building the whole front end for an app that has like no viable back end or no path to a viable back end, just like an offhand comment from somebody. So it's kind of crazy to work like that.
Sounds like a mock-up, right?
Yeah, basically it's like you're taking you're building the whole Star Trip and then you're putting the warp drive in it at the very end, to get it out.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing. So I hope it's fast, but I have no idea what to expect. So it's kind of like we're doing everything we can, and I hope it's fast.
I'm sure you will get a really strange audio format. Actually, the audio will be embedded in the video frame as like pixel data.
Metadata, yeah.
You have to pass that.
Yeah, it'll be like a bar at the top. It'll be like, yeah.
Like the VBI from the old days. Yeah.
Why is there static at the top? Yeah.
But on that, I read to some documentations, and it does Zoom ISO get the timestamps on when a frame and a audio bit was being recorded and is able to sync it that way?
There's a whole lot of stuff involved in that. Not all of it I can talk about, unfortunately. There are some areas where we might have walked off the pasture a little bit, and I don't want to get in trouble. So.
Yeah, totally. No, I just are you able to resync audio to video?
The way we're doing it, yes, we could. We could do it in a couple of different ways. Right now, we're doing it in the way that looks like it gives us a good visual sync every time, but we could allow the user to jump into that process in the middle. And that has to do with some of the capabilities of the library that we're going to license for audio, which I'm actually really excited to partner with this group. I can't say who it is yet, but as soon as I do, you guys are gonna be like, "Oh yay, great! I love that one." So I shopped around quite a bit for a good audio library, and we're gonna pay for a really good one. No, yeah, again,
Very
it's laying
cool.
laying the groundworks for multi-channel audio outputs of the app in the future. So it's
That sounds so fun.
yeah,
The
it's an
problem is
investment, you know.
my A1 will demand some ISO if they know that. Because all my A1s work with like QL1s and everything is already Dante based. And I told them, yeah, you'll get the Dante output from my Zoom room. He was like, what? You mean like maxed? I was no ISO. But if you do that for some ISO, the Zoom room can retire from on location work.
That'd be fun. Again, I think a Zoom room is great, and I think it does a lot of things well, and it's the most console-like version of the Zoom experience that we have, besides what we're trying to do on our end in the SDK environment.
Yeah.
But I have ambitions for where we could go next with projects like Zoom OSC, but waiting for Zoom to open up some doors before we can go there. But it's definitely a future.
And
Let me know if you need like an Next or something.
I know most of your conversation here is about Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC, but Streamweaver can are you looking in the future where that could work in a post-production environment? I'm just curious.
So there is a huge licensing deal for Streamweaver in the works right now, and I'm so excited to tell you all about it as soon as the ink is dry on the paperwork. But Streamweaver is in process on a really, really big activation where it's going to become part of another application that we've been working quite a bit with. That I think is just going to totally transform remote collaboration for show control and other things like that. So I'm very, very excited about the next step for Streamweaver. I'm just waiting for a contract to get signed, and then as soon as it is, I'm going to talk all about it because I'm very pumped.
And Streamweaver is amazing. Like we had a shoot where we remotely send up capture data, and like Streamweaver just worked flawlessly on like a 10-day production with like the weirdest network configuration and me doing weird stuff. It's an amazing product.
Thanks.
I'll talk to you offline.
Yeah, please let me know what you're doing. Yeah. But there's all sorts of stuff that like Streamweaver was kind of interesting for us because it was the first one that we actually commercially distributed. You know, it came out in November of last year, and we had some UI tweaks to it, but really it has like a whole. It's kind of like Mukana in the sense that like it's the tip of an iceberg where there was a whole bunch of development underneath that's designed for like some really advanced like core. It's built as a front end with this back end, and the front end is like the user interface and all of that. But really, what it's doing is it's calling on something else that's in there, and that something else is going to become part of another app, and that's going to, I think, once it's in there. It'll be able to do some really cool stuff. And we're also starting to experiment now with the cloud as well, as like the future of Streamweaver is the cloud. You know, that's where like you're not going to think about IP addresses anymore. You're not going to think about protocols. You're just going to have discovery and pairing codes. And then that's going to be like the whole experience of the app, and it'll do everything for you. And you know, there's talk about video and audio being part of that experience and making it like the ultimate SRT endpoint. That was what we started on, gosh, a year ago when I started making it. If you write about now, yeah, late July, early August is when we kind of broke ground on it, and we went from there. So it was cool. We started off, I mean, that app we started off as a video endpoint, kind of like that Rivet service. It's kind of similar to that, but like a year before them. And we looked at it, and I have this build of FFmpeg that reconciles NDI, FFmpeg, and SRT, which all had different licensing issues and over the years and caused a whole bunch of problems. But we kind of like got everybody back to the table And so if you look at our GitHub, we actually have it there. You can go get it if you want it. But it's a special build of MPEG that has all that in it, and that was the core for Streamweaver Pro. Streamweaver Lite is the app that is the only one that actually exists. We never released the pro version of it, but because we kind of turned our attention to Zoom ISO and felt that it was a better fit for the kind of workflow. We felt that Zoom kind of won the remote contribution game. We didn't think that SRT, because of the latency and because of like how much work would be done to mix minus and send a return and everything like that in real time, we kind of didn't feel like that was as helpful. But we definitely think that there are certain workflows where it is like point-to-point video is used for purposes other than like calling into a show. And so we're starting to revisit some of those conversations and figure out how that all ties in together. But there's the thing that we're working on in the future is going to combine audio, video, the cloud, and another piece of really popular software together, and that'll be sort of Streamweaver's next.
Will we see Streamweaver being integrated in Sumo C? Or like a Zoom
I thought about that quite a bit. There actually was a version of this that you could pair Streamweaver and Zoom OSC together, and you know how we have that like remote control through chat thing? It basically would turn that off, and then it would actually send the OSC packets automatically through the user targeting system. We never built it out all the way, but there could be. I mean, there definitely could be. But I think
let me rephrase.
Yeah.
If you release Streamweaver Pro with potential video support, could you see Streamweaver Pro being integrated in Zoom OSC? Basically, the idea is what I'm doing manually right now is I'm telling every participant, hey, we'll pay you for a vMix license, please use vMix, send me an SRT feed, and also pipe in the virtual webcam into Zoom. You'll never notice that we are doing anything. But if Sumo C could
have you played with remote expert?
Not yet, no.
That's what we used to use for that. I see what you're saying, because what you're saying is allow them to have a real-time conversation in the Zoom platform, but then allow them to send up their high-quality masters to an SRT server and mix it at
exactly. And who knows, maybe I can send them my IP address over a secret chat command, and they start sending, and it's
just
called
automatically is negotiated.
Zoom Talent Pro. And
so we did a show. We did a show like that. That show was. I actually have the reel for it, so if it's all right, I'll show it. But this one here, we did exactly that. So this is from a rehearsal, so pardon the terrible chroma key. But this production was done in real time on Zoom, but the video feeds going out to Isadora here are all SRT. So they have Remote Expert and Zoom running at the same time. Now, the tricky part is that I spent 30 minutes on sync every time we performed this show. Like I had to be super meticulous, because the peer-to-peer latency in Zoom was different from the latencies coming to me via SRT, because we had people in Italy, South Korea, both coasts of the United States and Canada coming together in this, and their SRT relative latencies to me were different than their peer-to-peer latencies. So they're reading a script, right? And they're reacting to each other's lines in Zoom and Zoom timing. But their SRT spacing was different from the way that their Zoom spacing was addressed. So we had to individually clock at each of them. And the way that I solved this was by having the production running on 5 different clocks. So I had real-time cues. Imagine trying to call cues for this show. Some of them have to be called, like the lighting cues for this. You see they have Streamweavers used for lighting in this show. Some of these cues are called in real time as they're performing the script. The stage manager's cues for the video cuts are based on the SRT clock. And then there's the post-sync ecosystem where we sent all the audio ISOs out to St. Louis for mixing, and then came back to us as a stereo mix down, and then went out into the show. So we had 3 different production clocks before the RTMP encode. And it was
How did you
it was so complex to put it together. Yeah.
How did you create time?
How did I create time?
Yeah, I mean, at some point you're like delaying things, right?
Yep. So the video feeds were buffered at the end.
Yeah.
So we sent out And some of this was accomplished by setting the encoders to have really large buffers, but the full chain for that production was actors in real time in Zoom with the lighting director, the lighting designer, and the sound designer both in that meeting in the stage, and a stage manager designed to manage them. They were in one meeting. The audio cues were SRT feeds back to me through Remote Expert, just with no video attached on them, so I stripped it out. The lighting cues were domestically burned into the video feeds, obviously, because it's lighting. Then there was the main stage manager. So the assistant stage managers in Zoom, the main stage managers with me on the phone, through Discord, and is calling cues based on a parsec connection to our office, where they're looking at a multi-view of all the incoming SRT feeds. So that is basically real time. So they're kind of virtually with me calling based off of what they're hearing from the embedded audio sources coming in before the effects are applied. So they're hearing that. And then I'm cutting Isadora based on, I'm calling different cues and creating the visual effects based on that with the high quality feeds. That then goes off to another computer for RTMP encoding, but it gets buffered because the audio is then sent off. And I think we were using Bird Dog Cloud for this. I sent all the audio feeds out separately to St. Louis, where this great mixing station was, where the guy brought all the audio feeds in, mixed them down to stereo, and shot them back. So then we have the stereo audio coming back, and my video feed is now ready. And then we had to sync it by like 500 milliseconds to get it back. And then it went out to RTMP and out to YouTube. And that was all done in my basement.
Wow.
With two-person team in my room to do that.
You have a nice basement.
It was I liked that office. That was a lot of fun. I'm much more like compact now, but I have all the same hardware capabilities there that I did then. But like, this is the thing, like, that was done for a piece of theater. Like, there's so much we can learn about like how to produce like really high quality events from those kind of workflows. You know,
And
and
also it proves that sync is something you can overcome. Like delay is something you can overcome, which I think a lot of traditional broadcasters are just not willing to do. Like they don't want to try. They just be like, nope, can't do it. It's too far. It's too late. I can't do it. Instead of,
and they don't realize that if you would put a delay on like all feeds going into the control gallery, like they would not notice at all.
No, of course. And if they had like 20 feeds coming from somewhere else and they were all delayed but in sync more or less, then they wouldn't care, right? But you know, there is more work, but it's just typical engineering stuff. Like, it's not hard particularly, it just takes time.
Yeah, and the other thing it takes is distributed hardware. A lot of people try to do these big old buffers, and it's like all doing it in one machine. It's just a disaster because it's like you're running out of RAM really fast when you're buffering video frames, right?
Totally.
But when you distribute it, like for example, the subtitles were in French for that show, but they were live. So it was just somebody with a PowerPoint screen sharing in a separate Zoom meeting to me to get me a low latency backhaul of that I could then buffer in Isadora to get the right matching to the dialogue. And like, but
I just keyed it, right?
Right, exactly. But I kid you not, the sound check for this was about 5 minutes. The sync check for this was 30 to 45 minutes a day.
Sure.
To get all of that clocked up and ready, because it was like 4 or 5 clocks to try to get everybody on board, and it was crazy because the SRT feeds were like a full second delayed coming into my ear, and the Zoom meeting was like several lines of dialogue because it was moving pretty fast ahead of me. So we'd get to a break, and then you'd have like everybody over 30 seconds sort of regroup into the Zoom meeting to have a conversation about how that scene went. And then everybody would go back into their little corners, but the actors would end the scene and then like just like hang out for like a solid 30 seconds before the director showed up because they were out on the YouTube side. It was crazy. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to try to. One thing I've thought about is having better clocks, like literal clocks, at every end of a connection, so that you can trust when that thing says that it's, you know, if I say I'm sending it at this time within milliseconds, right, then you know what the delay is because you know when you received it, and then you automatically configure a buffer to make sure that sticks, right? And it's always stuck to a certain clock, the studio clock, whatever that is, right? So which I think is a doable thing. I think the protocols don't do it. like
Right.
NDI doesn't have a timestamp, right? And so, well, it does, but it's not very reliable. And so it's only really useful for like audio sync, right? But
it was cool. I mean, audio monitoring for this system was
you must have been
it was
batty.
hysterical. Like I had like a room audio system that was on one clock. I had my computer speakers that were on a different clock, and I had my headphones on a third clock. So I could listen in and I could hear where any part of the show was by just like turning up different dials and listening to different things. But when everything was up and you walked into the room, it was utter chaos. Like you had to like mentally adjust to the
you room. Had to be sitting there for like 20 minutes.
It was very overstimulating. Like when I went on break, I had to like leave like the room and like go outside because of just how like overstimulating it was visually, audio, everything it was crazy. But it just goes to show that like these things can be done. I guess is the point we're making, is that like, yeah, these kind of workflows are achievable. We're trying to make things that address that. To Eddie's question, yeah, sync drift. We had Jonathan's entire job on that production was to watch the mouths and then to whenever somebody was not in the shot, he would rebuffer their audio and get them back in if they drifted. So he was literally like had his hands on the dials, like cranking it the entire 2 hours to try to keep that thing in sync. And it actually worked. We tried, I tried 6 or 7 iterations of this before we landed on this pipeline, and sync was always the problem. And the answer was just build a bigger buffer and police it more. But it was hard because you had people in Italy and South Korea who needed to be clocked up to people who were like 2 miles up the street. Like, it was very, very hard to get that right. And they of course had like the worst internet connections and Wi-Fi and all that, and multi-layer. Some guy had like a multi-layer NAP, but it was all Wi-Fi, and I was like, oh my god, how do you? There was so much insanity on that.
They had a router, and then they plugged their Wi-Fi thing and never actually configured it.
Yeah, it was all like mesh, but like not actually mesh, and it was a whole thing. I hate mesh networks. I never, please, for the sake of all that is good and holy, do not deploy a mesh network in the next 3 years.
Cheaper to pull a cable.
Yeah, right, exactly. Cheaper, and it will actually work.
A lot more reliable. Yeah.
Anyway, rant over.
Yeah, good conversation. Nice to be able to peek into that space and where you've been, what you've done, and well, good stuff. Anybody else have anything in particular before we wrap it up for a Thursday? Friday.
I remember you once said you're working on a plugging system for Zoom OSC.
Yep.
Did that die, or did I miss the announcement? Or is it still a work in progress?
There's a how do I explain that? There's a Zoom apps shook up a lot of stuff. So I think TBD on how we want to proceed for that. I think that Zoom apps is something we're looking really carefully at right now. As what would it take? There's pros and cons, but there's a space right now for somebody who is tuned into the production industry's needs for remote talent to use the Zoom apps ecosystem for like all sorts of different production tasks, because it's so easy to get a Zoom app installed on somebody's system. So easy.
Is it?
Oh yeah, I can invite you to install an app by just clicking on you and saying, send them this app.
But my administrator has to approve.
I don't know how it works in a domain, but I know between members of domains, that's at least how it works. But
because for me, I'm admin, but for me, that's the issue that we run into, that I can't send it to like Aaron. If he's on his work account, he can't accept it.
I think there might be an invitation that you can send that's separate from the like install request. That's like a link that
one is also plugged in the backend.
Oh, damn. All right. Well,
like Zoom events, but
you just have to email your IT person and say, turn this on, right?
Anybody else get the Zoom events lobby email today?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's open. No, it's changed. Huh.
Yeah. And
that poor intern.
Yeah, somebody got fired. Yeah, right. Yeah, it was funny though. For a brief, beautiful moment, there was like 2,000 of us in the lobby, and then suddenly all of our Zoom apps crashed. And then when we came back, it wasn't there anymore.
Oh wow.
They ran the
You
panic
guys-
button.
Anybody have a recommendation for just kind of a cool Zoom app to try it out and see what it's like? Anybody experience one that you'd say go
The
grab
clock
and
is
try
pretty
it?
cool.
Which one?
The clock.
The clock?
Yeah, I was a bit sad that when you click like share, that it pops it up as a screen share. I was like, "Oh, that's so annoying. Like I can do that with any other app as well. I hoped it was like internal, but it's pretty cool. Sheesh is also an interesting one.
What
to,
I
do audience interaction.
Here's
What I can
my
say is-
clock. There we
Yeah.
go.
what I can say is that what Zoom apps is half of a coin, and the other half of the coin has to do with some of those. It'll address some of those pain points. With like right now, Zoom apps have to use the real estate that's available. That's not necessarily going to be the case moving forward.
Is Zoom apps forcing Zoom to do a better job with their SDK, or is it?
So an area I can compliment Zoom. I have to be careful about what I say here because it's all under NDA. But the this information is public. The Zoom apps are developed on a different SDK pipeline than all the other Zoom applications that are available. So it's not using the Zoom APIs. It's not using the Zoom client SDKs, which as if you saw Zoom's email yesterday, they renamed all the SDKs again. So it's not using the video SDKs. It's not using the client or the meeting SDKs. It's not using any of the CLIs or any of that stuff, obviously. It uses its own ecosystem. And in looking at it, you can probably guess that it's basically a browser inside of the Zoom client, basically. That's how all these web apps were able to port over so easily. What I can compliment them on publicly is that they have done, that is the Zoom apps development team, and the way that community is organized is the best representation of community-based development at Zoom to date. It is miles ahead of the client SDK. It is miles ahead of all the APIs. The documentation is great. The developers are proactive. They're answering questions. They're having, like, there are ways as a developer in a Zoom app to get resources that are just unprecedented from any other platform in Zoom. So I hope that is the model.
Was it a new team?
It's a different team. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're killing it. They're doing a great job. I'm in that program. I have they do a fantastic job resourcing developers in that program. I wish I could get more specific, but until the program goes public, I can't necessarily speak to the capabilities that we have as developers. But there's a bat phone, to be able to get an answer and get help.
A bat phone where you don't have to pay 2,000 euros for? How amazing.
A quick question. Hey, I'm still out of sync. I'm not sure what's going on today with me. Hey, what are you guys using for DNS for connecting to the outside? Are you using Google's DNS or just curious?
Cloudflare.
Is that 111?
Yeah.
Yeah, 111 or 1001.
1001.
So
And
there's
I
I'm sorry, go
actually
ahead.
use Warp with it because I do some stupid stuff with like how I fetch websites together, so it's only for internal use.
Mhm.
I have the Warp client because it then routes the traffic through a private network.
Okay.
Yeah, Warp is cool.
You said Warp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It basically routes all your traffic through their Argo network.
Is that
to
the ARP?
Cloudflare. Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to get this network under control.
Yeah.
I'm glad I came in today because I couldn't understand why suddenly my NDI wasn't working. And there's too much going on in this lab. And then I remember you can't have Wi-Fi turned on, which kind of is a bummer. Do you know why? It's kind of a bummer because when I want to airdrop stuff or just do quick things, I use Wi-Fi. But go ahead, Jonas.
I know why.
Why?
Because Apple is amazing and does all those magic stuff for you. And it's amazing.
Uh,
The way NDI will advertise itself on every network interface on your machine, which is boneheaded. But I think now you can,
Now
with
it's
NDI 5,
you can pick it.
you can
Yeah.
pick one. But before, so you didn't necessarily have to route NDI over your Wi-Fi, but you can get MDNS responses over Wi-Fi, and then NDI doesn't know how to work because it's trying to work over Wi-Fi and it doesn't. So you end up routing around, and you could do it the other way too. But yeah, it shouldn't
works
do that.
fine
Is
here.
what I'm saying.
It works fine now because I had purchased a micro PC and just put an NDI Discovery in it that way. And I did put a NDI on a separate VLAN. I know you don't necessarily need to, but I just I'm kind of a neat freak. I just hate having stuff polluting my network. So the VLAN works pretty good. And Dante also having separate VLANs in the house here. So
Dante really needs a separate VLAN.
Dante, you have to like have an armed escort for each packet in order for it to actually work, you know. But
Dante was a mistake.
Well,
I don't know, Aaron. I love it. I have dongles on all my machines now, and pretty much everything plays nice with each other.
I know. I was just being silly.
In 2 weeks, I'm going to have to stop by the Zoom test kitchen a little more often because I ordered a Galaxy Fold 3, which has the hybrid tablet and phone experience. So I'm curious how the Zoom app responds to the request to run in tablet mode when it opens up, or if it'll stay in mobile, and what the multitasking.
As soon as you have
experience is
that,
like.
put Zoom Room's controller on it. Now,
Yeah, let's do it.
That
Let's
would
talk about
be
that.
interesting which one it takes.
Yeah, let's take a look. Because the multitasking stuff is really interesting, but I wonder if like Zoom will keep my camera on if I'm in multitasking mode and stuff like that. Like there's gonna be weird quirks, and what my screen shares will be like. Some sort of 4:3 center screen, but a 16:9 outer screen. So it'll be fun.
I think it's like 16:10. Is it?
Oh yeah,
on
it
the
is.
other?
It's got its own.
It's got a weird
So
aspect ratio.
write your own Zoom ISO. So over OSC, you can like pin one person to the inside, another person to the outside.
And I'll have all of like one client, and it'll be me, and
You
maybe
just,
like
like,
some
flip
other
it, just flip it
random-
around. Here, I look this way. No, I look this way.
That'll be fun.
Well, very good. Well, tomorrow is the Zoom test kitchen. Fridays, OSC test kitchen on Thursdays, 3:00 Eastern every week, almost every week. Haven't missed too many in the last year, but good to get together. Andy and team, thanks for all you're doing for the industry, and you cover up a lot of crap that we deal with straight out of the SDK, I'm sure. And I get to hear a little bit about it, but you make things good for us. So it's good stuff. Hopefully it keeps rolling. I told Andy, I said, hey man, gonna have to get it all done here soon because the old boy's getting hitched. You're gonna have to slow down a little bit or pay the price. So anyways, congratulations on that engagement.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
So happy for you there. Anyways, anything else from the group here? Earlier I put the YouTube link in there. Feel free to visit the channel and subscribe for archives. All of the Zoom Test Kitchen is its own playlist. Zoom OSC Test Kitchen's its own playlist, and then as well I've included by reference. So even if Andy adds more training to Zoom ISO or OSC, it'll end up over there in the Test Kitchen. So either place they'll always be identical. So just a good place for resources and the archives of each of our meetings. But it's about all I got for now. Awfully good to get together with you guys, and we'll roll out with some slides and music, and we may see you tomorrow, and if not, maybe next week. All right,
Thanks,
take
Jeff.
care, y'all.
Give Jonathan a hard time next week. All right.
All right.
See ya.
All right.